Zoom is always changing.
Hello. So, welcome to our second Stars Dance workshop. This one is going to be about unlocking the aspects. And Stars Dance Mystery School is an astrology mystery school, an online mystery school that focuses on the intersections of astrology, magic, activism. We're a queer astrology school, and we are really looking to use our astrology for all kinds of things, the personal and the collective. And we share a lot of our ideas on our Discord server, which is a really fun place to talk to other people interested in astrology and these intersections. We also run our offerings through our Patreon, which you can find on Patreon and look for Starsdance Mystery School. We have a few tiers, and you can join at a very introduction level and receive forecasts and also access to our server, or you can join at higher tiers and then get all of our content, which includes classroom content. And right now we are studying the aspects. So we thought we would do this this week's or this month's topic on aspects and unlocking them in a way of thinking how an astrologer kind of unlocks for themselves how do I access the meaning of the aspects. And we're going to get into what is an aspect and a little bit more details about that. But I want to introduce myself. I'm Tara Parsley Starnes, and I use they them pronouns. And um, I was a co-founder of Starsdance Mystery School. I've been an astrologer for over 30 years, and still I'm learning new things and still loving to teach and loving to watch people use astrology in new ways in their lives. So that is what I'm excited about. And I have two other co-facilitators here tonight. And Binsky, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Pensky, and I use they, them pronouns. And I am a queer witch astrologer, lives in Santa Cruz, California, original homeland of the Awaswas speaking Ohlone people. And I have been studying astrology for about 9 years, and I joined the mystery school near the beginning, and then eventually started helping with the mystery school. And I co-facilitate these workshops with Bonnie and Tare. And Tare and I also do offering the first and third Mondays of the month called Chart Reflections, where it's something that's open to the students of the mystery school. And we get a volunteers in person and Zoom person volunteers chart during those sessions. And so, and talk about how to actually go through a chart, how to look at a particular question or interest that the client might have. And so it's a great way to learn or just expand your astrology. Bonnie?
Hello, everyone. My name is Bonnie May. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Washington, D.C., otherwise known as land of the Piscataway people. And I study a mix of Hellenistic traditional astrology and modern and evolutionary. I kind of like having a base of the old stuff, but then learning about new ways that we can interpret astrology, especially in a modern world with many different kinds of people having access to it now. And I really enjoy electional astrology, which is something I do on the Stardance Discord. Every month I'll post a different election that you can use for whatever seems fitting for the planetary energy. I like the idea of using electional astrology for magic as a witch, and also like activism. That's something I would love to see more of too, but it could also be for getting a good haircut and things like that. So if you're interested in talking about electional astrology and like what to do with like certain dates, you can catch me on the Discord, and I would love to have a discussion about that. And I've been enjoying doing these workshops with Tara and Pinsky once a month, doing a different topic and kind of giving people a taste of what astrology has to offer. Check.
Yay.
And
I'm really happy about doing this with the three of you. Yes? Were you going to
oh,
say something, Pinsky?
oh, yeah, I was just gonna say before we start too, I just want to say that I will be looking at the chat box as we go on. So if something doesn't make sense, or you're like, say that again, or you have a question about something that we say, I'm going to be looking at that and can interject it at the appropriate moment. So some of the questions we might save until the end. But if it's pretty crucial to understanding the concept, we'll answer the question in the moment. Feel free to ask questions.
Yes. No questions are bad. All questions are good. All right. So I'm going to share an image for you of what is what is the keywords for an aspect? What kind of aspects are we looking at when we're talking about aspects tonight? And what a little bit of what their keywords are, what they mean. So an aspect. So what we see here are the glyphs, and I like really recommend when learning astrology to learn those glyphs right away. It unlocks some of the ability in our minds to start talking and thinking in astrology. So the glyph for a conjunction is here, a circle, the line. The opposition is this kind of barbell looking thing. The sextile is a star. The square is a square. The trine is a triangle, and the quincunx, I say it looks like a picnic table from the side, but that is just kind of like a shorthand idea of how it looks. Also, what an aspect is. So I want you to know that. An aspect is about relationship. So it is when we have all the planets in our chart, but an aspect tells us how the planets are talking to each other. And we base these particular types of aspects on how far away in a 360-degree circle the planets are from each other. And so we see here that the conjunction means that the planets are right on top of each other. They're 0 degrees apart when they're exact. And I'll talk a little bit about another thing that's called an orb in just a second. But an exact conjunction means that planets are exactly together, 0 degrees apart. And it means unity or merging. An opposition is 180 degrees apart, so that's the opposite sides of the wheel. That's 360 divided by 2. A sextile, the planets are 60 degrees apart. There is an encouragement with this aspect. We'll talk about more later. The square means that the planets are 90 degrees, so a fourth of the circle apart. And a trine means that the planets are 120 degrees apart. And the quincunx is a minor. It's not a major aspect. So the first aspects that I listed, the conjunction, opposition, sextile, square, and trine, are called the Ptolemaic aspects. They're the aspects used in a lot of traditional astrology, Hellenistic astrology. The quincunx is an add-on. And then astrologers have a lot more add-ons. There's a lot more minor and subtler aspects, and they're all very fascinating. I personally use the quincunx, so I'm going to talk to you tonight about the quincunx and what does that mean. In doing research for this class, I wondered, I used the term aspect without realizing how does that describe a relationship between the planets? And what it comes from is from the Latin aspitio, to regard. So when we're talking about an aspect, we're talking about how the planets are looking at each other. And some ways planets look at each other is an easy way. They see each other really clearly. And some, the vision will be impaired or enhanced in other ways. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But just to get into your idea, it's a relationship between planets, and it's describing a conversation those planets are having based on how they see each other. And we're going to get into some of the ways we unlock that as astrologers for ourselves. Um, yeah, so I think that is what I wanted to say about the definition of an aspect. Um, and also wanting to share with you what do I mean? Oh, so I'm going to show you a chart and show you what to look for when you're looking at an aspect. Like, how do we find aspects in our chart? Um, Also, I'm kind of out in the woods right now, and so my audio and video might not be working. So Pinsky and Bonnie, chime in and tell me to turn off my video if it's not working. Okay, so I am going to share this other small thing. It's an orb. I'm going to talk to you about orbs, and I'm going to talk to you about what it looks like in a chart to have how we find the aspects in the chart. I'm sorry, I'm fiddling around trying to find my files. So I'm going to share this thing, share this screen. This is an image of a chart. And this is tonight's chart. This is the moment of tonight. And we have the planets splayed out across the sky. And we also, in the center of the circle, have these lines that are drawing how the planets are seeing each other, or drawing the aspects. And over here on the left, we have what's called an aspectarian, which is just simply another way to notice or to note what the aspects are between the planets. And we can see in this aspectarian that we can even break it down a little bit, and we have some numbers. And these numbers refer to the orb, or the distance away from being exact. When the aspect is exact, we will see little zeros in there. But for instance, we can see that the sun and moon are in quincunx to each other, and that 3 means they're 3 degrees apart, and they're separating from that quincunx. The second set of numbers are the minutes within a degree. So it's 3 degrees, 6 minutes separating aspect between the sun and moon. And I want to just show you, all astrologers use different orbs, let's not say they all use different, but that astrologers can use different orbs. It depends on how we kind of conceive of the strength of an aspect. So an orb means what do I consider to be the amount of difference from exact to almost exact that still makes that aspect viable and valuable, and the planets are still seeing each other in that way. And so when you have a computer program, you can set your orbs. The program will ask you, what are your orbs? Because this is a somewhat personal thing that astrologers will use. And here I'm showing you my orbs. And for example, the conjunction means it's a 0 degrees apart, is the exact aspect. And that for the sun, these luminaries, for the sun and moon, I use a larger orb than I do for the other planets. So when I say a conjunction with the sun, I'll give 8 degrees. And when I say a conjunction with, say, Mars, I'll give 6 degrees. And so you can see that the conjunction, opposition, trine, I have the same degrees for for those aspects, but and for the square, but for the sextile, I reduce the orb a little bit because I feel like for me that the sextile is a little bit um, needs a little bit more of an exact aspect to be in effect. Those bigger aspects like the opposition, we can have a bigger orb, and for more subtle energy like a sextile, I'm going to choose a smaller orb. This is all based on personal preference. And I also have a quincunx, I can choose that. And I often use a minor aspect called a quintile that we won't be talking about tonight, but I find them fascinating. And like I say, the subject of aspects is really complex, and we're going to give you the basics and the beginning ways of thinking about aspects tonight. Pinsky and Bonnie, do you have anything to add about what I have said about any of that beginning piece?
No,
No?
I will just, yeah, I will just add that, is it, if you, as you read about more astrologers, there's some astrologers who do a lot of kind of historical astrology and look at the larger cycles of the outer planets. And sometimes those orbs are really different for them. Like Richard Tarnas, who's pretty famous for doing that work, uses a 15-degree orb for the outer planets. And so he's looking at, but it's like his scale is different. You know, he's looking at these larger societal and global movements. And so he's zoomed out way, so he uses a larger orb. But generally, when we're doing personal astrology, looking at a natal chart, we'll zoom in a little bit more because we're talking about one life. So depending, you know, you might move the orb around depending on what you are looking at.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to anything, Bonnie, or shall we go on? Okay. Thank you. So here's the first key. We're going to talk to you about some building blocks for aspects and how to begin to interpret the meaning and the energy of an aspect. And the first one that I think is so important are the elements. So I'm going to share another screen with you. And this is what we call the natural wheel. It's just showing the order of the signs in the zodiac and breaking them down in in the ways that their element and their modality. So, for instance, Aries is a fire sign and it's a cardinal fire sign. Taurus is an earth sign and it's fixed. Gemini is an air sign and it's mutable. And so we've got that. The first three signs, we have the three modalities. We have cardinal, fixed, and mutable, and we're going to hear about those in a little bit. And the first four signs will be fire, earth, air, and water. And then that repeats another time, fire, earth, air, and water. And then it repeats a third time, fire, earth, air, and water. So each sign, we have three of every element. We have three fire signs, three air signs, three water signs, three air signs. What makes those signs different are the modalities, which we'll talk about later. But knowing what the elemental energy of a sign and how that element might relate to another element, a different element, or the same element. So how would fire, a cardinal fire sign, relate to a fixed fire sign? And how would the fixed fire sign relate to the mutable fire sign? So we're thinking already about the signs as elements, and the elements being really important for understanding the energy that we're talking about. When those planets are seeing each other, we kind of think of the signs as being the lens that the planets will see through, or the costumes the planets are wearing, or just like something that is giving the planets a little bit of a particular focus. So when we have Mars in an earth sign, it's going to have a different focus from Mars in a water sign. And it's kind of what we're thinking about and asking ourselves when we're looking at aspects is, what is the elemental energy of the exchange or the way these planets are seeing each other? What do I imagine an earth sign seeing a water sign? Um, what would that what would that feel like? What do we imagine that being? What do we imagine two earth signs seeing each other? How would that feel between those planets? Can we imagine those planets feeling a bit of alignment because they have that same energy? Or is it too much of that energy? Are they so earthy that maybe they need a little bit of other challenges in their expression? How does a water sign see a air sign? Do they miss each other? Water being about emotion and air being about our thoughts. And often, we can feel the difference between those things. And when we look at a chart, we're looking at how the planets are seeing each other, but we can also relate our understanding of how different people we know in our lives are seeing each other. We might know people that we think of as really watery and other people as really fiery. And do those people get along? Or what do they like about each other? Or how do they, stimulate each other, and how do they kind of um, conflict with each other? So in the planetary dialogues, there's always going to be something about how do they get along and how do they not get along? How do they support each other and how do they challenge each other? And that begins the inquiry, I think, of what are those planets saying to each other, even when we're not even thinking about the nature of the planets themselves, which is, of course, a really important layer of interpreting aspects. So one of the things that's really important about learning astrology is just like understanding there are lots of layers and letting yourself not get overwhelmed with all the layers, because you can break it down into these very, very basic parts and begin to tell a really enticing and meaningful story um, about your own life or about the energy of the moment. We can ask these questions about the day that we're living through. We can ask these questions about our friends or important people. So we can ask these questions about events. So I just want to, that's the introduction that I have about elements, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into the nature of these relationships. But right now, I think we're going to go to Pinsky, who's going to talk about polarities.
Prepare for that introduction. So as you can see, this natural wheel, we have all these different elements, and so each element has one of two polarities. And so this is a place where also our mystery school deviates from a lot of traditional ways that astrology was taught, saying, oh, some elements are masculine, some elements are feminine. We actually talk about the energy of an element as being an inward energy, or the energy of an element being an outward energy. And so for an inward energy, it's like more internal, looking inside of oneself, sitting a little bit more stillness. And the inward energies are water and earth. So you think about earth, it sits there, it's stable, it needs a lot of force to change it. And so it's enduring, it's stable. And then water, in a similar way, water comes down, it seeks the lowest point, follows gravity, and so it kind of goes down, it goes inward. And so both water and earth are more like focused on like the body, emotions, what's going on with me, and maybe a little bit slower. And then we talk about fire and air as being outward polarities. And so they're energies that go out into the world, that move around things, that change things. You can think about air, is moving everywhere and all the nooks and crannies, and it's constantly moving. And similarly, fire, it's kind of consuming and changing things and putting out this energy. And so this really active process. And so both of them are just a little bit more active and outward. And we'll talk more about when we get into the specific aspects, but in our natural wheel here, the elements or the signs directly across each other in the wheel are always the same polarity. So you see like Taurus is across from Scorpio, both of them are inward. Aries is across from Libra, both of them are outward. And so that will play into, as we get into the relationship between the different signs, the polarity is important. Tara or Bonnie?
Thank you, Bonnie. You're going to talk about modalities now. The three.
Yes, so modalities is the next building block for looking at signs and aspects. And what Tara was talking about before with the elements, there's 4 elements. So when you divide up the 12 signs, it's 4 groups of 3. Modalities is flipped. There's 3 groups of 4. So it's a lot of math, but it all kind of makes sense when you put all these building blocks together. But the 3 groups for modalities, they are cardinal, fixed, and mutable, what Tara was talking about earlier. And they're kind of like ways that the elements express themselves, or ways the signs express themselves. And the way I like to think about them is that cardinal signs, they're the signs that begin a season. So when we have Aries season, that's beginning spring. And then when you have a fixed sign like Taurus, fixed signs are kind of the middle or the heart of the season. So it's when things are not really changing, they're kind of staying the course. And then mutable signs, so in this analogy with spring, that would be Gemini. Mutable signs come along to change things up. So they're telling the fixed sign like, hey, come on, let's go to the next thing. And they're kind of like a bit of mix of like the end of spring, beginning of summer. So thinking of the seasons is one way to think about modalities. I also like to, when I'm learning astrology and talking to my friends and learning their charts, I'd like to see if they have a lot of cardinal signs or a lot of mutable or a lot of fixed signs, because they also describe kind of like what things people are good at doing. Like if you have a team project, it's good to have a mix of like cardinal people and fixed sign people and mutable people, because cardinal signs, they're kind of about initiating change. So they're like, we're going in this direction and we're staying the course. But they're really about starting things new, starting things fresh, having a new project and just getting it going and not really dilly-dallying. They're just like ready to go. And the fixed signs, they're more slow and stubborn to change. Like they're not about changing at all, but they will continue with what the cardinal sign has left off of, and they will perfect it and kind of make it the best of what it can be for that, whatever the cardinal sign started. So they're more about being dependable and like staying the course, and doing things with a lot of integrity of whatever that project is. Then the mutable signs, they come along, and another word for mutable signs is double-bodied, because they kind of are like in 2 places at once. Like they're a little bit here at the end of a project and a little bit in a new area, starting something new, but they're kind of going back and forth, and they can also help generate a lot of new ideas. Like they're very much about like coming up with like new ideas and fresh ideas, and kind of being in a few different places at once, because their mind is like everywhere. So that's one way to think about it, is just like looking at the types of people and like the types of things they're working on. Like when you're learning charts of like famous people, celebrities, people in history, and the kind of things they did in their life, you can kind of look at it and see, oh, did they have a lot of cardinal? Were they really good at initiating new things? Or are they more like steady and dependable, like a fixed sign person? Or were they more of like someone who was really good at brainstorming new ideas, like a mutable sign person? And when you break it all down, there's three signs in each of those four signs in each of those three groups. So you're always going to have one, for example, one cardinal air, one fixed sign air, one mutable air, and etc. throughout the elements. Tara or Pinsky, was there anything I missed there from modalities or anything you want to add?
No, I think that's really great. And when we talk about the kinds of aspects those modalities make with each other, it will flesh that out even more. Like how do the modalities see each other? Yes.
Mhm.
So thank you. Um, yeah, so Pinsky is going to talk to us about our first aspect, the conjunction. And I've just got another little image just to um, help you see. We're using this wheel, this natural wheel, and oops, that's not it. Um, so yeah, start talking, Pinsky.
Okay.
We'll find the
All right.
chart.
Okay. So a conjunction is symbolized by the glyph that looks kind of like a sideways magnifying glass. And in the chart, they will look like planet or planets that are right next to each other. And sometimes you do have to look at, that's where the math comes in. You have to actually look at what is the orb, because they might look like they're together, but they might actually be further apart. But say they are close together, they are conjoined. And so their energy blends together. And so it can be hard to pull apart, which, the planets are acting together. And so they can be hard to pull apart. And so like an example would be, somebody had their Mercury, which is the planet of intellect, communication, how we put ideas together. If they had that conjunct their Mars, which is willpower, it can be aggression, how we get what we want. So if those were together, it might be like, oh, somebody who really knows how to use their words to get what they want, or somebody who maybe is prone to a little bit more like fiery speech and like harsh speech, or likes to fight with words. And so it's like the planets team up together, for good and for evil, or just like in all things. And so there's you have to do a little bit more work sometimes to pull apart, like, okay, what part is this planet and what part is this planet, because they're acting together.
Mhm.
So they'll always be, you can't have something called an out of sign conjunction, which is, so if we look at this natural wheel, a planet can be at the very, very end of Aries, and a planet can be at the very, very beginning of Taurus, and they can still be really close together, but kind of spanning that cusp. But a lot of times you will see them also in the same sign. And so they also just have a lot of affinity for each other because they've got the same element, they've got the same modality, and they have the same polarity. So they have a similar way of working in the world. Anything you two would add?
Right. No, at the new moon every month we have a conjunction, and then that's a powerful moment. And when planets come together in a conjunction, it means a beginning of a cycle. Hmm. Yeah. So thank you for that. And I'm glad you mentioned out of sign aspects. So this is what we mean. We're basing the power of the aspect on the sign. If those planets are seeing each other through their lenses of the sign, and those sign are the same, or are in relationship through these various aspects, that's in sign. And we're going to talk more about in sign so you'll get an idea. Those aspects that are in sign are more powerful, in my opinion, than the ones that are outside. So, just like Pinsky said, you could have a planet at the end of Aries and the beginning of Taurus within orbit being conjunct, and it's not going to be quite as powerful as the beginning of them being in the same sign. That's my philosophy. So it's something to think about when you're looking at making your own interpretations. Yeah, so Bonnie, do you want to talk about sextiles now?
Yes. Do you have an image for it, right? The sextiles? I'll describe what the
I'm
glyph
right up
looks.
for the
Awesome. Thank you.
for some reason.
Well, I'll just
Not
start
that I
talking.
won.
But when you're looking at
I'll find it.
the,
All right.
oh, cool.
What is this? I swear I am choosing the right one and it's showing me something different. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
I hate to this.
Yeah, so when we're talking about sextiles, when you're looking at the glyphs of the aspects, this sextile has such a fun name. It looks like a little asterisk. So I don't know. I'm actually, that's a good question for you, Tara. I might ask you later, like why the asterisk, like what that comes from. But it's a really cute little symbol, and sextiles I think of as just like really cute aspects because similar to trines, which we'll get to next, they're kind of about easing and getting along. So sextiles are when there are two planets that are seeing each other from two signs away. So basically, they're seeing each other in a sign that is of the same polarity, not the same element, not the same modality. Usually it's just like earth and water or fire and air, and they're two signs from each other. So in this chart that Tara is showing, if you have a planet in Aries, like right now we have Jupiter in Aries, Jupiter in Aries may be seeing Mars in Gemini, which is two signs away, and they're fire and air signs. So they're not the same element, but they're in elements that can collaborate, that can kind of work well together, not in exactly the same way, but in close enough way that they have some way of helping each other out. And then similar to that, but a little bit different, is a trine aspect. So that's the one represented by a triangle. So that's pretty easy to remember because it's like trine, triangle. And oh, the image went away, but it's represented by a triangle because when you're looking at the elements in the chart, it's basically an aspect when two planets are in the same element. So it kind of like makes a triangle shape in the chart. So if you have planets all in the same element, so for example, water, it would make like a triangle shape in the middle of the chart. Is it back? Cool. You
Yep,
see it?
it's back. It's a
Awesome.
the
Yes. Yes, if you see like
the
if you
water.
see like where all the elements are, like the fire signs all together, it would make a triangle shape. So it's just like a really cool visualization for what a trine is. And the way I see a trine is that it's planets in the same element. So even stronger than a sextile, it's like a little bit more amped up because they're in the exact same element. So the planets are communicating really well with each other. They're flowing really well, which I know is a very watery word, but I guess another way of thinking of it is that there's less friction because they are speaking the same language, basically. So they're communicating well with each other. They're helping each other out. One analogy that my friend Tristan used from Bad Sign Astrology was that a sextile is kind of like there's two friends that they get along pretty well and they're like helping each other with like a test for school, and they don't have like they can't help each other with the answer, but they can like at least give each other a lead, like, oh, like I think we can find the answer in this page of this book or like somewhere there. Like they have some kind of a way of helping each other a little bit, but not exactly. And a trine is more like, oh, I know exactly how to help you with that. So it's just a slightly stronger version of a sextile. Like they're both very harmonious aspects, but one is a little bit bigger than the other. And I think, which one's next? Is Pinsky or Tara talking about squares?
I'm going to talk about squares.
Okay.
We're going to see if I can share the right thing. Nope. It's doing a weird thing. It's honestly, it's not me. A square is what we all, when we talk about a square, we all want to go, ooh. Squares are the element, are the aspect that is the most challenging. They're the ones that are, these are the aspects when the planets are not getting along. We know we've talked about the lovely sextiles and trines that Bonnie mentioned, which we love to see in our charts and we love to feel in the day. And a square is between two signs that are in the same modality, but they're different elements. And so what here I have is just showing you how Taurus is fixed earth, and Leo fixed fire are square each other. Leo is also square to Scorpio, which is fixed water, and Scorpio is square to Aquarius, which is fixed air. You know, we also had the oppositions that are sort of tied to the squares because the opposite signs are also in the same modality. So we have a little bit of a similarity between oppositions, which oppositions can fight with each other too. They can come at each other. They're opposed each other. Squares are kind of coming at each other in a way that is between signs that are of a different polarity. So oppositions have the same polarity. So they're, even though they're opposing each other, they can find a way to kind of integrate with each other. And that's the hope we have with an opposition. We're going to take that thing that's opposite us and find a way to integrate. Whereas squares are always a kind of a friction. And I have this philosophy. We talk about squares in our aspect class as the challenges that create pearls. They're the signs that have a lot in common in those modalities. So, you know, fixed is kind of like what I think of as the ultimate modality that's in square that you're going to really notice, is because fixed signs hold their position so strongly. And so when you have a fixed square, you've got a very strong position each planet is taking, and it's going to take a while for them to figure out how to not fight each other but get along and make something happen. And that's the pearl that we get from that square. You know, so fixed squares can be quite challenging. Cardinal squares, just like Bonnie said, cardinal signs are about leadership and taking initiative. So they may have their conflict around who's the boss, who's going to take what is the strategy. You know, if we have the Cancer water sign square to the Aries fire sign, those are two polarities, fire and air, and they're going to struggle with each other in their method of taking leadership. One being how to create relationship and nurture something as we tend to it and take a leadership within that thing. That's more of a Cancer water mode. And a fire mode is kind of like blaze ahead and go for it. And so we can just kind of see how, if we have a strong position with an element, with that modality, how they're going to struggle with each other. And the planets are going to struggle with each other too. And then the mutable squares are interesting because, as Bonnie said, those modalities love to gather and disseminate information and learning, and they come up with new ideas. And so I find that squares between mutable signs are often about, how do I bring what I'm really excited about into the world? Because I'm picking up, so say Gemini in an air sign, which is square to Virgo, an earth sign. Those are square, they're both mutable, very different ways of processing information. Gemini is a learner and a talker, a verbal processor. Virgo is a doer and values service and values the pragmatic, whereas Gemini can be very lighthearted and very curious. And so how do we, in our own selves, if we have that conflict between ourselves, how do we find the balance or the way to be both? You know, a square often is like, don't think of it as either or, but both and. Like, how do I do both of those things? So squares are some of the more exciting aspects that you can have. You hear a forecast. If you hear, like, within the last couple of years, we've been dealing with Saturn square Uranus. That's what astrologers are going to talk about, because those two signs, those two planets, are in fixed signs right now, and they have a very different agenda for themselves and for the world. And we're living through that, and just feeling that struggle in world events. So yeah, the squares are a fascinating aspect. And Pincy's going to talk about the oppositions. I kind of alluded to them already, but we're going to get into them a little more.
I go overhead, it's a little loud, but yeah, it's Tara talked about the opposition. Can you put the wheel back up, Tara, or maybe you're looking for it now?
I'm
Yeah,
found process this work.
totally. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And a lot of images. So the oppositions,
Yes.
those are planets that are 180 degrees from each other. So fully across the circle from each other. And similarly to the squares, like Katara was saying, there can be like conflict, butting heads. But I really like oppositions because to me, it's like they're taking two stances around some sort of central issue or theme. Like Taurus and Scorpio are in an opposition, they're opposite signs. And for them, life is really important. But Scorpio is a little bit more on the, for things to live, we need decay, we need death, we need letting go, like we need things falling away. Of course, it's like, oh, but for life, it's things growing, it's abundance and fertility and like all the green growing things. And so they need each other. So it's like they just have two different ways to look at the same thing, and neither is complete without the other. So it has much more of a relationship that is moving towards integration. And so it's like, okay, well, both of these have something really, really important to offer. How do they need to blend together? And so kind of like the sextile, they have the same polarity, but just like a totally different way of doing it, because and they have the same quality as well. So for example, like Aries is the cardinal fire sign, is opposite to Libra, the cardinal air sign. So they both are outward energies. They're both cardinal. And so it's in some ways it's like, because they agree so much, it's like, oh, but there's something really important that is different that needs to be integrated in there. And so they all have like a similar thing in life that they're working with. It's like that polarity with Aries and Libra. It's really about self and other, right? And like there is no self without the other. And so it's like they need each other. And the Taurus Scorpio polarity is life and death. Gemini Sagittarius, like all about kind of expression, exploration, but different ways of doing that, like the very, very personal versus the very, very like impersonal and larger. Cancer and Capricorns, like feelings and then like structure at the same time. Like feelings are really important, structure is really important, but of course they need each other, right? If there's no earth for the water to land in, like it doesn't go anywhere. And then the earth needs the water to soften it too and give it more movement. So I because we don't have that much time, I won't go through all the different polarities, but are all the different oppositions, but they have I think a really fascinating interplay between each other. And so when you see them in a chart, it can be something that's really challenging, but it can be a great gift too, if the person learns to integrate it, or if it's something that's happening in the sky right now, if we learn to integrate it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, and maybe I will say also that since you brought up with the conjunctions, the new moon, the full moon always happens at an opposition when the moon is in the opposite sign of the sun. And it's kind of a moment of culmination and like, oh wow, this really different, the beginning of the cycle has gone on and this really different thing is happening, that sort of the sun needs this other piece to be complete. And then for the rest of the cycle, that gets integrated back
Mhm. Thank you.
in. Mhm.
Yes. So we've got one last aspect that we're going to talk about, and that is the quincunx, which is not, it's telling a very different story, and it's not considered a Ptolemaic aspect. So it's a little bit of an outlier. You won't find everybody using these. I find them to be really meaningful because they're important. We just talked about the opposition, where planets and this idea of aspects are when planets see each other. So when planets are opposite each other, they see each other very clearly. It's kind of like that illumination of the full moon. I see you. I know what you're about. Whereas the quincunx is an influence that we can't see very easily. I had an astrology teacher that had this metaphor of when you're at one end of a hallway and you're looking down at the other end in a room, and you can see the end of the hallway, you can see, and that's an opposition. But a quincunx is someone off into a side room and you can't see them. So when we look at a quincunx is um, between two signs that have nothing in common. And we can see here that Aquarius and Cancer are 150 degrees apart from each other, and they're quincunx. We see that Cancer is opposite Capricorn. Capricorn and Cancer see each other really well. Cancer and Aquarius don't see each other very well. Aquarius sees Leo very well, doesn't see Cancer well, doesn't see Virgo well. Cancer doesn't see Aquarius well or Sagittarius well. And when we look at the qualities of the signs that are in a quincunx, we see there's nothing in common. Not the element, not the modality. So we have cardinal and fixed, and not the polarity either, which is Cancer is the downward and the inward, and Aquarius is the outward. So we have a relationship of two planets trying to figure each other out and not understanding each other. The energy of a quincunx can be sometimes stressful, sometimes that feeling of I don't get what's happening. I often think of the quincunx aspect as the paradox. It's like these two things are connected, but we don't understand. They don't make a whole. They're the things that just don't come together. In the case of Aquarius and Cancer, it's how Cancer gravitates to the home and towards tending and caring, and Aquarius gravitates to the collective, but bringing in ideas and wanting, to stimulate inspiration, whereas Cancer wants to create safety and security. And so there's a big disconnect between this sort of big visionary energy and this like creating safety energy. And how do we hold both of those? When we have two planets quincunx, we have to hold both of those. They have to attempt to see each other's point of view. So I think quincunx can be a very interesting aspect to explore. And yeah, that's kind of like a little bit of a quincunx. We wanted to finish up our thing tonight talking about each of our particular favorite ways of understanding aspects. And Bonnie was going to talk to us first. So Bonnie, do you want to share how you understand aspects, or what you like to think of?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a variety of ways I like to learn aspects. I think some of the ones that y'all are going to talk about later, are some of my favorites, like embodying aspects. But one model I wanted to share was that in Hellenistic astrology, the aspects, or at least the five main aspects, so conjunctions, oppositions, trines, sextiles, and squares, they're each associated with one of the major planets, excluding the sun and the moon. So conjunctions are kind of similar to Mercury in this model because Mercury is like a planet that's often very close to the sun, often conjunct to the sun. A lot of it, Mercury is about like merging with whichever planets nearby, like communicating between planets. So in that model, Mercury would be like a conjunction, a lot of like getting close and like trying to learn everything. And then sextiles are similar to Venus because it is about that ease and flow and like cooperating. Whereas trines are similar to Jupiter in a very similar kind of way where it's like there's a lot of ease and flow, but it's a much bigger aspect because Jupiter is all about going big. Um, and then we have squares, which are similar to Mars because there is that kind of tense conflict energy. There's that friction, which is very Mars. And then the last one, which I found interesting, is the opposition is considered similar to Saturn because Saturn moves very slowly and oppositions, kind of what Pinsky was talking about before, they're really powerful to integrate, but it might take some time because you are balancing these two signs that kind of see eye to eye on one level, but see it in a completely different way. So it's kind of like a tightrope. So Saturn, being the planet that's the slowest of the traditional planets, is like kind of like that slow integration of opposition. So I thought that model was interesting and something to think about as you're also learning the planets, of like thinking about the characteristics of the planets and how they relate to the aspects. And I'll let Pinsky or Tara continue.
Thanks.
Bonnie? Yeah, I will talk quickly about the way I understand or relate best to aspects. I definitely just use a lot of body movements, and for me, actually using my body, whether it's my hands or just my full body, to move like the aspect. Just, like how does it feel for my body to move from one place to another place very smoothly and feel that energy. And then I also think about or feel into what that energy feels like too between two people who are really understanding each other. The energy is flowing between the two or being exchanged. Like so I'll actually feel that in my body and try to relate the aspect to like how does this actually feel in my body. Similarly, like with something like a square or opposition, I really, really enjoy like what is that feeling of these two things coming together. And I invite you to, you can do this with your hands right now, just like how much force is coming from both of them, and then just the contact and the friction between them. And then similarly, we've been talking a lot about the planets having conversations or relationships. Just how does it feel in my body when I'm across the room from somebody that I don't like or that I disagree with? And so just helping anchor the aspects in these actual experiences I've had in my life of flow and ease, of conflict, of not seeing eye to eye versus totally agreeing. Yeah, it helps me realize, oh, it's not just these abstract things that we're talking about, like these planets in space, but like, oh no, the actual relationships they're having, and we have those actual relationships with other beings in our lives. So that can be a tool for helping understand what the different aspects feel like. Check.
Absolutely. I love that. Um, yeah, so I love what you bring, Bonnie, about the planets governing different aspects, and then also to remember that we're really animals, Pinsky, that our animal bodies have so much wisdom. So to just like any way we learn, like our natural way of learning, we can draw these aspects. Hemlock, who is also a facilitator and co-created our aspect class with me, really brought in how they love to learn through drawing and coloring and making, these relationships between planets and signs through image. One of my favorite ways to think about aspects is through the harmonics, and that gets me to the numerology of the aspects and how that relates to tarot. When I learned tarot, and numerology has a big part of tarot, and that what I mean by numerology is the ones have a certain energy, the twos have a certain energy, the threes have a certain energy, and those translate over to the aspects as well by how we divide the circle to get the aspect. So a conjunction is when we divide the circle by one. And so the harmonic of a conjunction is one. In the tarot, the ones are the aces. They're the beginning. They're like the really strong like force. And so you can get that idea of a conjunction is a beginning. It is an initiative kind of energy. The conjunction, or no, I mean the opposition, we get by dividing the circle by two. And so we have the twos. And often, just take out your tarot deck and look at the twos to get an idea of what different ways oppositions can look. It can look like choices, like I go this way or this way, or I have something in my life um, that I'm trying to figure out how to work with, or there's two things coming together and creating that kind of integration that the oppositions promise us. So, look at the twos. Those are the oppositions. When you divide a circle by three, you get a trine. And those are the cards of harmony. Those are the cards, it usually, like unless it's the swords, but it's kind of like it's taking the polarity and maybe even the binary of the opposition and bringing the other way, the other option out. So it's sort of the non-binary. The trine is that harmony inducing stable energy, because we're not swinging back and forth between duality. So trines create that harmony, and we divide the circle by three for those. When we divide the circle by four, we get a square. And those are about structure. Those are about structure and power. It almost helps us to visualize that conflict that we're experiencing also is very stable, and it's going to create something. It's going to create a foundation and a structure when we figure out how to incorporate those diverse influences. So when you divide a circle by five, you get a quintile. Yeah, I use quintiles in my astrology, but we're not going to talk about them because it's another subject. But a five is a very powerful number too, and I like quintiles because they divide a circle by five, and we get a pentacle, and there's a lot of power in that pentacle shape. And fives in tarot can be the moment where we reach some sort of challenge, but we also have to put diverse things together in order to move on. And we move on to the sextile, which is dividing the circle by six. And we get back to harmony. We get back to a balanced harmony where we have two threes. And that's why sextiles feel so good, I think. It's almost like we can tell a story of like come through some hardship, and now we get to kind of like go, we're here in a place of resonance and reception. The quincunx does not divide a circle. It's one of its oddball characteristics. And so that doesn't fit into this model. But that's one of my favorite ways to kind of like come at it from another mode, another learning is the tarot and numerology. Yeah, so we gave you a lot of ideas, and I'm really interested, some idea to ask questions. Are there questions? Was someone going to say something? No? Okay.
I didn't see any
Yeah, would you
questions
like to
in the
sum up?
chat. Yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah. So, anything we said that didn't make sense? You would
yeah.
like us to um, return to it, or we can bring it to a close tonight. Anything you'd like to say, Bonnie or Pinsky, about aspects?
Yeah, I just wanted to
as
add
we close.
one more thing that I like to do is yeah, when we're talking when Pinsky was talking about embodying, I like to dance and I like to I don't really make playlists because Aurora, who shares her playlists on Stardance, she makes really good playlists for different planets and signs. But I like to listen to some music that represents that planet or that sign or that aspect and
Mhm.
dance to it. So that's one thing I like to do to learn them.
Mhm. Yeah,
I'm
that's great.
glad that sounds like Ben just we helped them learn or understand a bit more. I'm glad we got that out of the class. I guess the last thing I want to say is
Mhm.
kind of relates back to our last workshop, but these are also not just not just little lines on your chart, these are actual like geometric relationships of the planets in the sky when you were born, so it's very cool to also think about that if you're working with your own natal chart of just like, whoa, the sun and moon were opposite when I was born, and like, I can still see that in the sky every full moon, or just oh, these planets were conjunct when I was born. That means like the planets are actually, the way we're viewing them, they're actually next to each other, appeared to be next to each other in the sky. So it's also cool to think about that embodied aspect of it too. It's just like these are actual things that you can see in the sky, and that still happen. That these actual celestial bodies are having these relationships. They're constantly evolving.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you, Pinsky and Bonnie, and
Mhm.
thank you for attending our workshop. Um, yeah, and I hope that if you aren't a part of our school, that you consider joining. If you're watching this video, we'd love to have you. So good night.